All right. Again, adventures, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is Daily Vlog 2025, number 315. And today, I needed a drink. One of these days, I'm going to remember to get the drink before I start recording. But today is not that day! As a reminder, have you picked up your copy of The Hearthwitch's Guide to Magic and Murder, Book 1 of the Hemlock Saga, written by USA Today best-selling author Kiri Callaghan? Links to get your own copy are in the description down below. And as a reminder, this is not an ad. This is not sponsored. I make nothing off of this. Kiri is my friend. I like her writing. I want more people to read it. That's why we do it. Okay. So, I've been doing more prep work for the December campaign, which is probably going to be a through theme for all of November. It takes a lot of work to create a 4-session mini campaign for a system that I've never played before and has only been out for a few months. So, yeah, I'm going to be doing that a lot. But one of the things that I got done today, after getting some amazing maps for this, I'm super excited about this. Like, you guys don't know just how excited I am. I'm super excited. But one of the other things that I have to start doing is I have to start designing encounters and other things like that. And I've mentioned this before. I personally do not think that, well, I guess for a very long time, I have thought that my ability to build encounters in tabletop RPGs was relatively weak. Like combat encounters specifically. I can create a bunch of other really interesting things. Like right now in my Legend of the Three Kingdoms campaign, they're doing these big war scenarios where these huge armies are coming to attack these cities, and the players get to choose like a little faction to control, and we do these big, massive battles. And I designed the entire system from scratch, and it's working relatively well, and I enjoyed that. And I've done very intricate, very interesting puzzle encounters, and role-playing encounters I do super, super well. But for the longest time, combat encounters was something that I just struggled with. And now that I have been running games in so many different systems, I've come to realize that my problem was not I don't design good combat encounters. My problem was I didn't used to be very good at designing D&D 5th edition encounters. Because for 4th edition, I didn't write many 4th edition adventures. But the few that I did, I actually created some very interesting encounters that were a lot of fun. But 5th edition, I've just never been particularly good at creating interesting encounters. I can create challenging encounters. It's not very difficult. You know, put big monster, lots of hit point, does lots of damage. It will be challenging for the players. But interesting encounters have been something I've struggled with until relatively recently. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, first of all, I've been running different TTRPGs, and I very, very strongly recommend, even if you have found your TTRPG, like you're like, no, this is my TTRPG, it's the one that I want to devote myself to. I want to be like the bestest person in the world at running this particular TTRPG. That's absolutely fantastic. Go ahead, specialize. That is brilliant. I mean, look at something like Chris Perkins. He dedicated his life to D&D, and he was absolutely phenomenal at running D&D. Like one of the best, hands down. So 100% you can do that. However, if you truly want to get good at being a dungeon master, a game master, a storyteller, whatever they call it in whatever RPG you like, you really do need to try other ones and not just read other ones, though reading other TTRPGs is very, very useful, but actually physically force yourself to run a different TTRPG. Like I said, it's one of the reasons I have a December campaign, because it just makes me a better dungeon master every single time. I've never run a TTRPG and went, well, that was a massive waste of time. I have always had an absolute blast doing it. I've always learned something new. So anyway, getting back to encounter building, combat encounter building specifically. So up until recently, I've just considered myself that creating combat encounters is just not one of my strengths. And then I discovered Flea Mortals. If you're not familiar with it, Flea Mortals is MCDM's monster manual, effectively, for D&D 5th edition. You can buy it on D&D Beyond. If you want to use it there, that's where I have it. Or I don't think I actually own it, but I have one of my players owns it, and because I have content sharing on, they've shared it with me. So it's very useful in that particular aspect. But and for anyone who doesn't know, MCDM, that is Matt Colville's production company. They're the people that made Draw Steel. We'll be getting back to Draw Steel in a little bit here. So, when I started looking at the monsters and everything in Flea Mortals, I started realizing just how kind of backwards I had combat encounters in my head. Like, I did have some good things like this is something I learned from running 4th edition. As you get into higher level D&D, the lose condition for combat cannot be your party dies. If you're not familiar with the term, lose condition is what causes the combat to end, not in the party's favor. And in low-level D&D, and low-level just about any TTRPG, the lose condition in almost every combat encounter is, oh, you all die. Because that's a very real thing that can happen. When you get to high-level D&D, and high-level in general, TTRPGs, depending on the TTRPG, dying is a minor inconvenience. Once you hit level 13, 14 in D&D, dying's a minor inconvenience. You've had Revivify for a really long time. You're already starting to get some of the more powerful resurrection spells. And you have so many tools you can use to keep yourself from dying. And you have a lot of experience. If you've gotten your character up that high, you have a lot of experience with your character. You know what they can and can't do. And so one of the issues that a lot of DMs have, and it's the reason why there's a lot of people that will say, oh yeah, D&D's sweet spot is between 5 and 12. Anything above that in D&D is massively broken. It's not that it's broken. It's just the techniques that you use to challenge players between levels 5 and 12 are no longer challenging to players at level 17. No matter how much you scale up the monsters or anything like that, you just cannot use the same techniques that you use in mid-level D&D as you do in high-level D&D. And what Flea Mortals... So anyway, I'd known that, and I had tried introducing combat encounters where there were more interesting aspects, and it wasn't just try and wipe out the enemy hit points, but it still wasn't really all that fun, and I got... my players enjoyed the combat encounters, but it was mostly because I put a lot into the role-playing of the encounters, and my players enjoyed combat and destroying enemies and stuff like that. That's still fun. But I was still kind of really struggling. And then I found Flea Mortals, and the monsters in there have so many more interesting abilities and features and things like that allow them to do something more than, well, I go over here and I do damage. And it instantly reminded me of 4th edition combat and encounters, because monsters in 4th edition were just insanely fun to run because they were all designed to kind of work with each other and do kind of weird, interesting things, and I got that same feeling from Daggerheart. Like, Daggerheart monsters are very, very interesting and really fun to run, and you get to do really weird, interesting things with them. I think the combat encounters I designed for my Village of Hamlet game were really, really fun and interesting. Um, until the players broke them by using tag team actions. But no. And so now that I'm doing Draw Steel, and Draw Steel, again, heavily inspired by D&D 4th edition, so the monsters, and it's MCDM, so the monsters are interesting and unique, I'm starting to try and forget some of the bad habits I developed creating combat encounters in 5th edition that were very kind of one note. And so I thought, 10 minutes into this video, I would share some of the little tips and tricks that I've learned for really any TTRPG, but this is specifically things that I've learned from other RPGs that I'm starting to implement in 5th edition, but these should work for any of them, that will make your combat encounters more interesting. So, the first technique. I've already mentioned it before, but this is very, very important. Don't make all of your lose conditions the players die. I can't tell you how limiting it is for you as a dungeon master to have all these really, really cool creatures and everything like that, but yet the only thing that they can do is try to remove the player's hit points as quickly as possible. There are so many more interesting things that you can do. Lancer was really, really good at this, because they have an entire section in the GM portion of the core book about what they call sit reps. Sit rep is a military term. I'm actually not sure off the top of my head what it stands for, but I think it's situation something. But what the sit reps chapter is it's basically going, these are different styles of combat encounter. Like, this is an escort mission where you have to take a single NPC from this point to this point, and these are the various complications that can arrive. It's still combat. You're still making attack rolls and everything, but it plays very, very differently, because instead of trying to just kill all the enemies and keep yourself from being killed, you are trying to move from one point to another with an NPC that's generally very, very squishy, and that changes completely how you play the game, and how you run your character. And if encounters like that happen often enough, it will affect how the players build their characters. Because again, when players are presented with the only lose condition is we die, and the only win condition is they die, then they're going to build their characters around that idea of whatever gives me the most damage the fastest is always going to be the best answer. Or whatever makes me the most difficult to kill is going to be the best answer. And just switching the things up, with, again, escort missions or defend a point or control points. That was another thing that I thought was really, really interesting and fun in Lancer, was the idea of control points. This is something that you see in, I don't know if you see it in modern first-person shooters as much, but it was really, really big in, like, the early 2000s. Like, every first-person shooter had a control point map. Most of them had multiple control point maps. And I guess there's still a few. Like, I know, what's it called? Warframe. Love Warframe. It's a third person shooter with ninja skills and all these other things, and you're a robot, and it's super, super cool. But they have control point stuff. But it wasn't something I'd ever seen in a tabletop RPG, and it's a really, really fun thing. The basics of a control point is you will have a number of control points and at least 2 different teams. And what you do, or the goal of it, is you have to get to these control points and have more of your characters in the control area than the enemy's characters. And whoever has the most characters in it at the end of the round, they get a point for that thing. And you can put modifiers in it, like the more people you have, the more points that you could get in, or, you know, if there's any of the enemy units in there, you don't score any points and things like that. Like, there's a lot of variations, but it makes for a very, very interesting encounter because placement on the map matters immensely. Your ability to get from one side of the map to the others matters immensely. So players that have the ability to move super fast and super far are going to have massive advantages over players that can't. And players that have the ability to move enemies in some way, shape, or form are going to be the MVPs, where in a regular battle, the ability to move enemies is still very, very useful. But the people that can move enemies are going to be setting up someone else to be the MVP, not really doing anything useful themselves other than setting other people up for success. So yeah, look into different things. And then there's other things like, you know, attempting to, like, one of my favorite encounters I've ever seen. Chris Perkins ran a 4th edition adventure. I think it was for the, what's it called? Robot Chicken guys. It was a bunch of people from Robot Chicken. I think, I'm not 100% certain, but I think it was. The video exists on the internet somewhere. You can find it. Chris Perkins used to run games for celebrities all the time back in 4th edition. But in this adventure that he ran, it was kind of a little dungeon crawl, and at the very end, he introduced a skills challenge as part of the combat. Basically, there was this giant sphere in the combat arena that had this circle of runes around it, and it was effectively counting down. And if it got to the bottom of the countdown, then there would it would summon a really powerful enemy that the players would have to deal with. And so the players would have to find a way to stop this countdown somehow, and that's where the skills challenge came in. However, at the same time this is happening, there's a bunch of cultists and other thing around it that are actively attempting to stop the players. And so the players actually had choices. They could try to interrupt this ritual, which generally required some sort of magical knowledge in some way, shape, or form. Or they could fight the cultists, because the cultists were going to make the countdown go faster. So players that wanted to use their combat abilities and stuff like that, they could do that and still be useful. And then players that wanted to do more of the role-playing stuff and use their skills in that, they could be useful as well. And both were required to succeed. You couldn't have everyone just choose to do combat, because then, while yes, they would stop the cultists for making it go faster, they wouldn't stop the countdown. It just would take longer. So things like that create really interesting situations where the players have a choice between doing more standardized combat and then doing something more skill-based or, you know, role-playing based as part of the same encounter. Creates really interesting dynamic things. So first thing, just come up with different win conditions and lose conditions. Put chases in as part of your combat and kick encounters, where the players have to get to a certain place and they're just constantly being hounded by bad guys, like the end of Metroid or something. Moving on. The second tip: movement is so much more important than it seems. What I mean by this, some of the most interesting combat encounters that I've run have included a monster that had the ability to teleport or fly, or something that gave them kind of a hypermobility aspect to them that allowed them to quickly reposition themselves to be in the exact correct place that they wanted to be, or in the exact place that the players didn't want them to be. Giving enemies the ability to just move more than just, oh, I go 4 steps this direction. You know, give them the ability to disengage as a bonus action, or have a teleportation spell, or even more fun, switch places with players and things like that. Anything that changes the setup of the board, effectively, creates a lot more interesting choices than you would think. Because first of all, the players are going to get annoyed when the bad guy keeps moving, especially if you have melee players. They're going to get annoyed because they have to be close to the enemy in order to be able to hit them. And if the enemy is constantly teleporting further than they can move in a turn, then they're going to be very, very frustrated. And it's going to force them to come up with something different than just, I charge towards the enemy and I hit them. They're going to have to start anticipating where the enemy is going, or find a way to stop them from moving in some particular way or form, things like that. And especially once you have kind of an established team, players that have been playing together for a little while, they will get into kind of a groove where everybody knows what the other person, everyone else in the group is kind of good at, and they may not have solidified this by writing anything down or anything, but they will have like formations that they're very used to using. And by just adding in some radical movement to a few of the monsters on the field, it will interrupt that ability for them to go, oh, so yeah, every time we get into combat, we have the paladin river rush forward, the ranger finds a spot to sit, the rogue stealths, and then the wizard starts raining down fire. That's what we do every single time. And if during the first turn, the bad guy instantly teleports right next to the wizard, or to the other side of the wizard, so we can smack him in the back of the head and then have all the players way over here, well, then they have to come up with something new and something interesting to be able to deal with just this hyper movement. Now, does that mean that all of your characters should have significantly more movement? No. The thing that makes the movement interesting is it has to be different. And what I mean by that, if every single monster you use can double or triple move, then that just becomes the norm, and it also feels kind of like cheating to the players. Because it's like, well, why do we have such limited movement while all the monsters we've ever dealt with have so much? Nope, there needs to be monsters that follow the same rules as the player. And that will help develop some normalcy. And there should be some monsters that move slower. Allow them to be large and bulky and hard to hit, and allow them to kind of dolop, because the more variety in the movement, the more interesting your combat encounters are going to become. Because especially if something is like really, really slow moving, make it hit like a tank. And that way, one of the ways that the players can deal with that is never getting close enough to the thing to get hit by it, because they know getting hit by it is going to hurt really, really bad. That's the reason that it's slow. So yeah, vary your movement a lot for your enemies. It will create more interesting encounters and create places for them to go to. So moving on. The third tip: create interesting arenas. This is another one that I've played around with quite a bit. My biggest issue with it is just my map making skills are very, very poor. And so a lot of times the ideas that I have in my head, I have a hard time putting them down in a way so that the players can understand them. But the arenas that your combat encounters happen in need to be interesting. There needs to be a purpose for it other than being the box where the bad things happen. Use multiple dimensions. Don't have everything on a single plane. Have stairs going up to a higher area. Have balconies and overhangs and things like that. Have cracks and holes. Have debris and rocks and shelves and other things like that the players can hide behind for cover and other things like that. That's going to make your combat significantly more interesting, especially especially if the enemies use it the same way you want the players to. So if you put things in there that you want to act as cover for the players, have the enemies use them as cover. If anyone doesn't know, D&D has had a cover system since 5th edition D&D has had a cover system since the player's handbook. Like, cover has always been a thing. You have half cover and 3/4 cover. Half cover gives you a +2 to your AC. I think 3/4 gives you, I think it's a +5 if I remember correctly. So those are real things that exist, that have always existed in 5th edition, and most DMs I know never use cover rules. So create interesting places for encounters to happen. Put a water feature in the middle of it, whether it's a puddle or a fountain or a river that happens to be going through the area that you're fighting. Put a water feature there, and then allow the players, and again, the enemies, to use it. Allow your enemies to use the environment to their advantage. If there's water, have them freeze some of it so that it prevents the players from getting closer, or have one of the enemies freeze it so they can just walk across it really fast and the players can't use it as a way to kind of slow people down. Allow different things to affect people differently depending on the environment that they're in. Someone's in water, gets hit by lightning, have it do something different. Maybe not extra damage, but have it do something different. Reward the players for using the environment, and at the same time have the enemies use it back against them. You'd be surprised how often your players kind of learn from your enemies, especially if the enemies do something that's particularly effective. The players remember that, and they will try to find a way to use it against you, if for no other reason than to kind of shove it back in your face of, we learned it from you. Because players love getting one over on the DM. So have interesting arenas with varieties of levels, have places for cover, have environmental factors, have like difficult terrain is something that I see so rarely used, and yet it can be really, really interesting. Especially if you add difficult terrain to somewhere that already has something bad happening to it. Like maybe you have difficult terrain that also has spikes on it, and so they can move slower and they also take some damage going through it, things like that. All of those things are going to make your combat significantly more interesting. And again, if you want your players to use it, your enemies have to use it. Enemies, again, are not just hit points on a stick. They need to have brains. They need to understand tactics and things like that. So yeah. Moving on. The fourth tip. Synergy is interesting. I myself tried to create an encounter that had some synergy. I had these two creatures that when they were within a certain distance from each other, they would automatically heal each other just from proximity. There was no action required. They just automatically healed themselves. And so the players would have to separate them. And the healing was significant enough that if the enemies were right next to each other, the players were not going to be able to take them down. And that was the point, is it would require the players to kind of split them up on the battlefield, and then again with the ability for these creatures to be able to move relatively quickly, it required the players to think. That particular encounter fell on its face because the players were able to like two-shot one of them, and then it was just a really boring encounter because the synergistic aspect of it was gone. But that should be something that you're looking at with all of your monsters. Again, if you look at Daggerheart's monster design, leaders specifically are designed to synergize with other enemies on the battlefield. 4th edition had lots of synergies as well. Again, if you read Flee Mortals, which is, again, it's MCDM's 5th edition monster manual, They have entire sections where it just goes, hey, this is kind of a pre-made group of enemies, and this is how they synergize with each other. They do have some kind of built-in synergies, things like pack tactics for wolves, where if there's 2 wolves next to someone, they get advantage. And yes, that is a synergy, but it's a really, really basic and boring one if it is the only synergy that players ever did deal with. You know, synergies could be something as simple as one monster has the ability to slow enemies and another, or slow players, and another monster has the ability to drop damaging areas. So the first monster slows the players. The second monster drops a damaging area that now, because they're slow, they can't get out of it in time and take additional damage in it. That is a very interesting, very cool synergy that the players will instantly pick up on. The first time they get hit with this slowing effect and then have the area around them set on fire and they take additional damage because they can't get out into the time, they'll go, okay, one of those two's got to die now. So yeah, synergies are so interesting and they allow for so many more cool things to happen. They are significantly more difficult than the other tips I've given you to design around, because it does require you not only knowing the system relatively well, but it also requires you understanding the monsters themselves relatively well, and how often they're going to be able to pull off their synergistic abilities, whatever they are. Again, if you would like examples for things like that and how they can work, Daggerheart has great synergistic aspects. Draw Steel, I am working my way through the monsters book because it is a very complex game, so it's taken me a little bit of time to refresh my memory on it. Lancer has some pretty interesting synergies. I don't think they specifically call them out. The various 4th edition monster manuals are treasure troves for looking at really cool synergistic abilities when you look at, because as you're going through the 4th edition monster manuals, they will have little sections that go, hey, this would be a challenging encounter for level 4 characters. And it'll show one of the monsters that's on the page that you're looking at, and then some other monsters that basically pair well with them. Like a fine wine. So yeah, again, putting synergies into your combat is probably the most difficult thing to do, and will take the most time for you to kind of learn what does and doesn't work. But once you get it under your belt, and every single system is going to be different for what synergies work well and what don't. But once you get it under your belt, then you can start really designing interesting tentpole style counters that allow you to do very, very cool, interesting things. So, as always, interested to hear from you guys. First of all, do we have any DMs out there that have messed around with encounter design, specifically combat encounter design? Do you have any things that work particularly well for you? And or what would you say was the most interesting or most fun combat encounter you've had at a TTRPG table? Doesn't have to be D&D or anything like that. Just an interesting combat encounter that you dealt with. Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today, and I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.